so long ago that I'm sure some of you don't even remember it. During the Biden presidency, there was a period of time where every gas station near me had a little sticker that said, "I did that," and it was Joe Biden pointing to the gas prices. Now, what was happening at the time was that Russia had invaded Ukraine, and in response, the international community had started sanctioning Russian oil. The reason for this is because the Kremlin specifically, at least according to them, depended very heavily upon Russian oil. They also added as kind of a tacked on argument that Russian oil is also kind of dirty oil, so it's like less good for the environment, maybe. That didn't seem like it was the number one priority. It seemed like it was very clearly driven by a geopolitical conflict. But there was also an environmental argument in there that Russian oil is dirty. And so a lot of Europe decided to sanction Russian oil in the hopes of removing some of the money that goes to the Kremlin. Now, sanctions are a controversial issue. Sometimes sanctions can be very, very negative thing. I would even go so far as to say that they amount to a kind of economic warfare at times. Sanctions are pitched in many circumstances as an alternative to war. We don't want to go to war, so instead we're just going to sanction you guys, and it's going to kind of hurt your economy a little bit, and you guys are going to have to stop doing what you're doing because you don't want to go past sanctions and on to war, particularly with the United States. So sanctions are like a, hey now, we're warning you, don't be doing what you're doing, okay? But sanctions can be two different ways. In this case, this was a targeted sanction, as opposed to a blanket sanction. I don't know if that makes it good or not. I think it makes it better, because a blanket sanction often hurts the majority of the population of the country being sanctioned. You look at Afghanistan, there was a period of time where I would argue the American sanctions on Afghanistan after we pulled out were massively devastating to the population of Afghanistan. Like, we were contributing to starvation and hunger within the region by sanctioning them. And theoretically, it's meant to punish the country's behavior. But really, the country's behavior is determined by its leadership. And if it's a country whose leadership doesn't really give a single shit if its people starve, which is most countries, then sanctioning that country sometimes just leads to hardship for the people without necessarily actually changing their policy choices. So a sanction on an industry that specifically affects the leadership of Russia does to me seem to be at least a little bit more tactically sensible than blanket sanctions. So what we did was we sanctioned Russia. Europe sanctioned Russia. Like a bunch of different countries independently, in show of support for Ukraine, came to the conclusion that they wanted to sanction Russia, is my understanding. And America, we often have a choice of whether we want to be a part of the global community or not. We have the strongest military in the world. We're basically in control of every international alliance, every international monetary arrangement. So we always have a choice, I feel. The Biden administration had a choice of whether or not it wanted to sanction Russia. And it didn't have a choice over gas prices directly, but it did have a choice over whether it wanted to signal support for these sanctions, knowing full well that if all of Europe and America sanctioned an oil supply, that would raise gas prices for ordinary people. I would argue that the liberal counter-argument that, oh, you think Biden has control over global oil prices? You think one man just controls the whole global oil market? Is a little bit patronizing and not really accurate to what was going on. And I think it comes off as a little bit elitist, because we're looking at a working class population who just saw their gas prices shoot up, and we're saying, oh, what are you idiots? You think that's Biden's fault? When Biden made a very clear signal by sanctioning Russia that he was contributing to this problem, that he cared more about getting involved in the geopolitics of Ukraine and Russia than he did about the gas prices of the average American. I think that's a problem. Now, we're under the Trump administration, and I know you guys have a very short memory, but some people do seem to remember the Biden administration just well enough to gesture at hypocrisy, right? The Trump administration has been enacting tariffs, and the tariffs have been, get this, contributing to high consumer prices. I know, shocking. Tariffs, making things more expensive, they do that. That's what they're for. There was also a lot of inflation under the Biden administration, some of which potentially was unavoidable as a result of COVID, but also, maybe it wasn't unavoidable. The conservatives obviously would say that the government spending causes the inflation, but I think the counter argument would be that a lot of that government spending did massively benefit working people during the pandemic. I don't think a lot of people could have survived without those COVID checks or without, protection so that they don't get kicked out of their housing because they're unable to work because of COVID. So I think some amount of state intervention and relief during a pandemic is reasonable, and it may have caused some inflation, but I think that inflation is just a manifestation of a necessary downside of the fact that everyone was suddenly unable to work. I think that if you have a situation like the pandemic, which renders a significant portion of the population relatively unable to work for a period of time, I think that's necessarily going to have some kinds of consequences somewhere in the economy. And it's just a matter of where and how we're going to see those consequences manifest. That said, I don't think it's untrue that the Trump administration is contributing to high consumer costs right now with the tariffs. But there are things you can do if you want to simultaneously raise consumer prices and help working class people. When liberals talk about climate change, it is widely and very clearly understood that climate change is a significant problem, and that if we have to make some kinds of sacrifices, it might be necessary to do something about climate change. A carbon tax, for example, probably would raise gas prices if just applied on its own, which is why most progressive-minded people on the left try to steer away from a hard carbon tax proposal and towards a proposal more like a cap and dividend regime. A cap and dividend regime, just to explain the core policy side of this video, is where you place a cap on how much CO2 a company can emit into the atmosphere, as opposed to allowing them to have a sort of a trading scheme where they have vouchers for how much CO2 they can emit. You place a hard cap and you say, look, here's the line in the sand, don't cross it. This is as much CO2 as we can handle going into the atmosphere, and this is as much CO2 as we're going to allow you to put into the atmosphere. And then you take that money from that above that line taxation, right? You take all of the money made from that cap and you release it back to the general public through a dividend, kind of like a universal basic income, checks directly into Americans' pockets. The idea is to have what's called a just transition. That's what they call it, where you are simultaneously fighting climate change, but you're also making sure that the costs of fighting climate change aren't being borne primarily by ordinary people who already are struggling to survive and can't really afford for their gas prices to go up any higher. You're trying to soften the blow of a necessary policy intervention to fight climate change. I think that's the right approach, because I don't think we should abandon entirely the environmental cause, and I don't think we should abandon the working class either. So I think that's a reasonable, doing a bit of both kind of an approach to the issue here, right? Donald Trump, when enacting the tariffs, did that, actually. To my surprise. When he first started enacting the tariffs, I said, this guy's an idiot. Because clearly, all the ordinary people in my life, all the ordinary people around me are pissed as hell about these tariffs because they are directly affecting them and the industries they work in and the food they buy and I play a lot of board games. The board game costs have increased significantly. This is a stupid move. Like politically, forget about whether it's a good thing to do or not. It's a politically stupid move. It's going to render him very, very unpopular. But then he did the thing that I would have suggested he do in order to lighten the blow, which is that he's promising to give back a lot of the money made through these tariffs to ordinary Americans. Now, the way he's going about it is through income tax reductions, because of course he is, because he's more of a conservative. Whereas I would go about it by just giving the money to people directly, raise social spending rather than lowering taxes. But at the end of the day, I think it is largely middle-class people he's helping. And the Trump accounts that he's created, again, helping working-class people. So he's softened the blow. My other big criticism I had of the tariffs was that the tariffs were a little bit nonsensical because he was being very wishy-washy on which countries he implements them in and whether or not he actually wants to implement them or not. And if you implement a tariff on China, the production is just going to move to Thailand. But then he did what I have suggested as the policy proposal, literally the exact percentage I've suggested, a 15% global flat tariff. I don't know how to criticize someone who is doing the exact policy things that I, from the left, have been suggesting we implement the entire time I've been talking about politics. I think at the end of the day, a lot of people's opinions about politics seem to amount to gestures at hypocrisy and whataboutisms. Oh, this president went to war. Well, so did your guy. It's like, well, yeah, they've both been going to war for a very long time. Maybe we should be mad at both of them. I think we should be mad at both of them for raising consumer prices. But I also think we should think critically about whether or not separating from the global economy to a degree is something we want to do. And I think it is. I've already made a video, the left case for tariffs. I've already made a video, the left case for tariffs, and I think that outlines the case for them pretty clearly. So I think we need to be asking ourselves not, should we implement policies that maybe in the short term are going to raise prices for the average person? We should be asking ourselves, what things can we do to make life better for the average person, to be a spoonful of sugar, to help the medicine go down, of fighting climate change and of separating from a global economy which has lots of negative consequences for the average person in the long run.